Then we start out here.
And how long are you going to have?
Well, before the tape, we have 3 minutes. And so hi, this is Pinellas Pass, and I'm Mike Slicker. One of the great things about Pinellas County, and I guess Florida in general, is that we still have a lot of our original pioneers with us. And that's what today's show is about. We're going to visit with Mr. and Mrs. J.B. Starkey. The Starkeys are best known for Starkey Road, I guess is how we mostly know of them. But Starkey Road originally was the road that went out by their ranch, and yes, that was a ranch. They had lots of cattle out there, and as Mr. Starkey says, when I was 5 years old I wanted to be a cowboy. When I was 85 years old I still wanted to be a cowboy. And that's what today's show is about, the cattle industry here in Pinellas County, and one of the major figures here in Pinellas history, Mr. J. Starkey and his wife Blanche Starkey. Sitting with me is Sadie Johnson, a Largo historian and an author of Largo Then Tell. And Sadie has been a friend of the Starkeys for a good many years. When did you first meet the Starkeys?
Well, I think it was about 1930, in the early 30s, that I met the Starkey family.
And how did that happen?
And that was through the Taylors. The Starkeys were very good friends of Stansel and Marion Taylor, and I worked for John S. Taylor packing plant in the old citrus days when citrus was booming, and I met them then. They were good friends, and they went hunting together, and Jay and Stansel.
This is out along Starkey Road they would go out?
Well, I remember going out there on quail hunts, and of course there was lunch served in the woods, and it was a fun type thing to do while the men hunted quail. Took the bird dogs along, and Stansel had quite a group of bird dogs that if you were ever out there at night, you would understand that there were a lot of bird dogs around, because if they started barking, they all barked at once, I think. And that's how I knew them early. And then, of course, I knew Jay Starkey when he was tax collector, and I remember how respected he was by everybody. I think he was a friend of everybody in the county and maybe the state.
Well, I'm sure that's true. And as we go into the tape that we're going to see right now, we're in the Starkey's den. They've talked with us, and that's what we're going to see right now. We're sitting in the den of this Mr. and Mrs. J.B. Starkey's home today, and we'll be talking quite a bit about the cattle industry here in Pinellas County. Mr. and Mrs. Starkey have both been here in Pinellas County or thereabouts for nearly 90 years now. They've been responsible for lots of different things here in the county, among which is a little park down near the waterfront of St. Petersburg named Pioneer Park. And several years ago, Mr. and Mrs. Starkey saw that a monument was erected with the names of several hundred of the early pioneers in this area. Mr. Starkey, let me ask you, What would you most like people to remember about those people that are on that monument, and what gave you the idea to do that?
Well, having lived here since I was 4 years old and remembering so many people who contributed to the growth of St. Petersburg in various ways. And of course those people are all gone. They have heirs here, a lot of them have heirs here. But I just would like for the people whose names are on that plaque to be remembered by the pioneers and their heirs, as well as the newcomers. Of course, a man in those days, very small, when the town was small, he served on the city council, he served on different boards and different committees, and contributed. If they weren't able to contribute money, they contributed work. And speaking of parks, all the park from the yacht club to the Benor Hotel was named after Blanche's father, who over
Mr.
a period
Straub.
of years campaigned through the paper. He owned the St. Petersburg Times when it was a weekly newspaper. And the waterfront, when I was a small boy, was where the yacht club is now, and from about First Avenue South to about Second Avenue North, 3 blocks there was covered up with such things as boatways, machine shops, fish houses, and docks. And he put on a campaign through his paper for many years to move all that out, move that down in the Bayboro area, and which was finally accomplished, and the city named that, created that park. Of course, there was some dredging done. Before there was a dredge there. It was quite different as it is now, and by the way, the first dredge that was ever put in that bay was named Blanche, after Mrs. Straub's daughter,
Good.
the present Miss Starkey. And but in answer to your question about what I wanted to accomplish was that I did want the people to always know who was responsible for the growth of St. Petersburg in this area, and their names to a great extent are on that plaque.
Yes, sir. Who are some of those people that probably had an effect or an influence on yourself? I know that growing up here in the area that each of you knew a good many of those people, and Mr. Straub among others. Who are some of those people that had an effect on you? And
Well, I worked in a store when I was a small boy and delivered groceries and delivered bread, other stuff to other stores and different people. And I did know a good many of the pioneer business people. And many of them, of course, I have them in, most of them in a book that I put together a number of years ago, but to think right back off of them, but there's Mr. Arthur Norwood, who had a grocery store on the corner of 9th and Central, and later had a dry goods store, they called it in those days, on the corner of 4th and Central, what's now the Rutland Building. He was a fine man. I thought lots of him, learned lots watching him. Mr. George Edwards, who was one of the first county commissioners, had a wagon shop where the Florida National Bank tower stands today. I remember seeing wagons on the street with a sign on them, with a letter on them, manufactured by George Edwards and Son. He was another very fine man. Mr. Lee Davison, who was a carpenter, first class, had 3 boys and served on the city council a long time. Mr. Abe File, who was on the first of St. Petersburg and Darby Works, which was a lumber yard and manufactured various kinds of house things as doors and windows and those kind of things. Was a very fine businessman. And Mr. E.C. McPherson, who I worked for quite a while. Mr. Ed T. Lewis, who had a grocery store on the corner of 3rd and Central. Mr. W.F. Smith, who had a store on the southwest corner of 3rd and Central. And
all right, sir. When let me ask Mrs. Starkey a question for a minute. Where did your father come down from, and when did he?
Well, we came from North Dakota.
Yes, sir.
Yes, when I was 4 years old, that was in '98.
Yes, sir.
And just for the winter, and my father's health wasn't too good, but he went down to the bay and lived in the sand and sun himself, and he felt so much better. We went back to Grand Forks, North Dakota. And then that fall, when it began to get so cold, he began to get sick again. So we came down in '99 and spent the winter. And then my father bought the Pines and bought a couple of lots on 4th Avenue now, and built a house, and we lived there.
Okay. Mr. Starkey, when did, I know in your early youth you were down in downtown St. Petersburg and did a number of different jobs. When did you first go into the cattle business? A lot of the people here in the area now don't realize that at one time a good deal of Pinellas County was devoted to the cattle industry. When did you first get into the cattle industry?
well, I can't remember. I was born to love horses and cattle.
Yes, sir.
When I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a cowboy. When I was 85 years old, I wanted to be a cowboy. I did some other things, but I loved the woods and loved horses and cattle. I bought my first calf for $5 when I was 11 years old. That was a milk stock. When I was 19 years old, I bought my first range cows. I bought 3 head. And the following spring, I had three calves besides the 3 cows.
Hello, I'm Ed Whiteley, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Clearwater Historical Society. As you may know, we were given the Plum House by Dr. David Knack along with funds to move the house to its present location at Ed C. Wright Park, 1380 South Greenwood Avenue, Clearwater. Presently, we're sharing our building with the Clearwater Neighborhood Housing Services. This house is open to the public weekdays from 8:30 to 5 p.m. Come visit us and see what restorations we have accomplished so far. We would like to urge you in the Clearwater viewing area to become members of the society, and you may pick up an application at the Plum House. Also available at the Plum House is a copy of Clearwater, a pictorial history written by Mr. Michael Sanders. These books were donated to the society by the NCN Bank, and the sales of these volumes have been very beneficial in our restoration project. Thank you very much.
Hello, welcome back. So we were sitting during the break, Sadie and I were talking a little bit about the Starkeys and what fine people they'd been over the years, and what a really pleasure it was to go into their home and talk with them a little bit. And I know that during all through the time that they've been here in Pinellas County or in the area, they've been well respected during or throughout the years. What during the was it the 30s and 40s? He was the tax collector here in Pinellas County?
I believe so. I don't remember the exact dates, but I know that he served probably more than one term. I'm sure it was more than one term. And then he suddenly decided that it was not for him, that he wanted to get out in the country and get away from the tax office, and he just decided not to run again.
He certainly did that.
Yes.
We'll go back and talk with him a little bit more now. At a ranch.
Well, that was what's now Starkey Road. We called it Ulmerton Ranch, named after Mr. Ulmer, who owned most of that whole country at one time. Ulmerton Road was named after him. Where Ulmerton Road crossed the Coastline Railroad, there was a community there called Ulmerton. And there had been a sawmill there, and when the Filter Land Company sold the country, divided it up and sold it in about 1912, thousands of acres in 5 and 10 acre blocks. Ulmerton was a community, was just up where the railroad crosses the Ulmerton Road. So I bought 10 acres of land in 1922, a mile south of Ulmerton Road there, and put my first cattle. And I bought a bunch of purebred Hampshire hogs from a man in Tampa, and I had a hog farm and cattle there until I could get. I didn't have enough cattle to make a living,
Yes.
so I had hogs with it for many years. And then in 1927, I sold an interest to an old friend of mine. Family was old friends, the Cunningham family, who came here from Tennessee in about 1909, and he and I owned it till we sold it in 57. He passed away the last week in 56, but we had contracted to sell it just a short while before that. And then in 1937, two of his other brothers and myself bought a ranch in Pasco County. Bought the land rather, something in excess of 15,000 acres, and fenced it and started a ranch there. And we added to it, so we had something in excess of 16,000 acres. And we have sold, the Cunningham brothers all passed away before me. We had a partnership agreement whereby in the event of the death of any of the partners, the other partners had the choice to buy if they wanted to within 6 months. And it so happened that I'm the survivor and have been for a good many years, and my son lives on the ranch now, and we have sold considerable of it to the Southwest Florida Water Management District, where the Wilderness Park, I gave them 250 acres of land and sold them about a little less than 3,000 acres more at that time, and put in the deed that it could never be developed.
Yes.
Only for a wilderness park and a well field. So they get well, and then at a later date, I contracted to sell them quite a bit more. And this year will be they will buy the last of the land under contract in 1986, and that'll wind it up this year. But the land cannot be developed, only for water.
Yes.
And I want the future generations to see some of South Florida like I saw it when I was a boy.
Yes.
Of course, the virgin timber, most of Florida was cut off in this part of the state soon after the turn of the century. But second growth timber now is as big as, some of it as big as the virgin timber was, so we still have some pretty good timber country left.
Yes. When you originally got into the cattle business back in the 20s, I know that the cattle business back in the 20s was quite a bit different than it is today. And can you tell me a little bit about what kind of differences there were in living on a ranch in 1923 versus 1986, for instance?
Well, of course, the cattle business in those days was open range.
Yes.
There were no known ranches hardly, even in the 20s. And there were no fences to speak of. Cattle ran on open range. And there were men that owned thousands of head of cattle that didn't own maybe 40 acres of land.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's the way it has been since the pioneers first came to this country. A lot of them came here and brought their cattle with them from Georgia. A man who I knew real well, was an awful good friend of mine, his family was Mr. Bert McMullen. When he was 13 years old, he helped his father and maybe some older brothers and other men drive cattle, around 400 head of cattle, from near Moultrie, Georgia. 3 weeks after they started with them, they turned those cattle loose on the south side of Bell's Lake. In those days it was called Bell's Lake. It's now Lake McGorry.
Oh.
In my lifetime, it's had 3 names: Bell's Lake, Salt Lake, Lake McGorry. They turned them loose there 3 weeks after they started near Moultrie, Georgia, on the south side of the lake, where pretty close to where the Lakewood Country Club golf course is today.
Yes, sir.
And there were many other people came to Florida and bought cattle from Georgia when they first came. And they had worlds of cattle on open range, and they required lots of riding, and in most cases cattlemen helped one another. In the spring of the year when they went to market and branding, they'd get together, and maybe 6 or 8 of them, maybe they'd all have some extra help, and they would stay in the woods maybe for a couple of months, marking and branding, and cover many miles. But that was very similar to ranching and the cattle business in the West. It really didn't call them ranches because they didn't own. I knew a man that owned 10,000 head of cattle in the Kissimmee River Valley, lived in Fort Meade, and didn't have any land down in the Kissimmee River country at all. And there were many other people like that. There were men that looked after several men's cattle, maybe, had a crew of men, 6 or 8 men, had a wagon, mules or oxen that moved their camp from one site to another, bedrolls, feed and what have you. And as late as 1926, I went to the Kissimmee River to count a bunch of cattle that were enclosed in a 225,000 acre ranch, which was the biggest ranch east of the Mississippi River at that time. There are bigger ranches in Florida today than that. But I went down there to count. Likes brothers bought these cattle, and they asked me, the Likes brother asked me if I'd go and count for them. The man that made the sale was counting for the seller, and I was counting for the buyer.
Yes.
I wasn't able to stay the whole summer, but there was about 14,000 head of cattle in that purchase. And that was somewhat the way the cattle operated. Of course, we're a small county here. We were West Hillsborough County when the pioneers settled here, of course. And there were several men here that had cattle. Likes brothers, and they had cattle when I was a boy from Inverness to Point Pinellas.
My goodness.
And through 3 or 4 counties, and they had before they started going operating down south.
What kind of men were the Likes men?
Well, the Likes, they were 7 brothers. I never knew Dr. Likes, but of the 7 brothers, I knew 6 of them. And they were a fine bunch of men. Dr. Light, I understood, told them whatever they did to stick together. And they stuck together, and of course most everybody knows they've accomplished more than any one family in the state of Florida in the 20th century.
Yes, sir.
Many, many things they're into now. Their biggest business was, when I was a boy, was cattle. Some of them, and of course, later they were in the shipping business and cattle business and so many different kinds of banking business and so many kind of businesses. But all of those original 7 brothers are gone. I knew 6 of them. But and they were fine men, and they certainly were nice to me. And other boys that didn't have anything, and they knew they believed in them, and they helped them. And
in this county, I know that you knew a lot of the McMullins as well.
yes,
And
Well,
I've heard you mention Uncle William
there was
McMullen.
one old timer that lived in St. Petersburg, J. Will Booth, who was born at Safety Harbor.
Yes.
He was one of the original Booths, and his brother, O.D., I believe, was the first white child born on this peninsula. And Mr. Will Booth moved down here, had a place out here on Lelman Avenue and Haynes Road, before it was Haynes Road. And he lived out there a good many years, and then he got into Petersburg, moved into town here, had 3 children, and he was worked at the Blocker Transport Company. In the summertime, Mr. Blocker was in North Carolina with part of his horses, and Mr. Booth ran the stable here. And I loved horses, and I used to go to that stable and look at those horses. I remember well a man going down the street one morning when I was working in the store. 2 doors from me, there was another boy working. He was older than me, and we were sweeping off the sidewalk between 6:30 and 7 in the morning. This man drove his horse down the middle of the street there, and he said, this other fellow hollered to me and said, "Jay, you see the horse Mr. Miller's driving?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "He eats every snake he sees." I never heard that expression. I've heard it lots of times since. Well, I couldn't help but wonder about that horse, and long toward the middle of the day, I was making the delivery on a bicycle, and I'd stopped by the Blocker Transport Company, who was just a couple of blocks from where I worked. Just at noontime, they were feeding up. A man named Tatum, George Tatum, was feeding the horses. And Mr. Miller had left his horse in there for the day. People come in from out of the country, leave their horses there, and have them fed at noon. And he was feeding Mr. Miller's horse, and I said, "Well, Mr. Tatum, what kind of horse is Mr. Miller?" He said, "He's a good horse, Jay, but he's blind." Well, he did eat all the snakes he saw, and I never heard that expression before.
Hi. One of the things that Mr. Starkey has done over the years is write a book, and it's Things I Remember. And indeed, it's just exactly that. It's the things that he has remembered over the years, along with his wife. And I've enjoyed reading it. Sadie, you've spent some time with the book. What are some of your general impressions about it?
Well, I think what he says about certain locations in St. Petersburg, or like Fifth Avenue, was all dirt, and he talks about riding in the woods before all the electric lights lit up the earth, and I imagine what it's like out in the country, what it was like in those days. And he paints a very vivid picture of what St. Petersburg was like years ago, and compares it to what it was in 1979 when he wrote the book.
I especially liked his ability to give a little piece of history and then give a little piece of his own history and sort of run them together with just what you're talking about, that clarity of mind.
And he
That's a lot of
remembers the
fun.
names of everybody and the names of all the horses he knew, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He sure did.
Very clear.
And Mrs. Starkey's had an interesting history here in the area, too. We'll have to talk more about her sometime as well. But we have enjoyed today and all of that, and certainly enjoyed the Starkeys as well.